Welcome one and all, I'm Decoy, and today we're going to be talking about one of the worst things you can buy in Fallout 76. Now, of course, I'm not talking about things you can buy with caps, but rather things you can buy with atoms, your hard-earned money. So I'm going to level with you right off the bat. I'm going to be talking about shelters. Please, before you click away, freaking out, going, no, shelters are the best thing ever, at least hear me out. Pretty good odds you're going to agree with me on some of my points. Now, first thing to be said about shelters, of course, their big selling point was a little bit more relaxed building. You get a little bit more freedom, you can make things float, little things like that. But that came at a hefty price because there are multiple things you cannot build within a shelter. And I'm not just talking about the well-known things, but there's also some decorative type items that, for whatever reason, you're not allowed to build. I'm sure they chalk it up to it's a bug that they've never fixed. Like there's certain chairs that, for whatever stupid reason, you can't build in a shelter. But either way, ignore the bug. Let's focus on the main things. The two key things that you are not allowed to build in a shelter are resources, plants, things that generate resources, and then allies. So let's take a look at the first thing, the resources. So my initial thought as to why they might not allow you to build them was, well, things can get destroyed in, say, a camp, but you're not going to have enemies showing up inside your shelter destroying your stuff, so maybe that was thought of more of it's unfair for you to be building all this stuff in your shelter. But that doesn't really make sense because there are ways you can go about building things in your camp to where they're just not going to get destroyed. So it had to be something else. And I think the most logical explanation would be that as much as the 76 team struggles with coding, especially really wonky things, I think, resources, I've got it dialed in. So say you have plants growing in your real world, whatever, it easily tracks that. But then say we go throwing things into a shelter, something that's not constantly around. So shelter 1, we'll just say you've got Tatos in it, because why not? You've got Tatos in your camp in shelter 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever. Maybe part of their problem is trying to track all of these different resources happening within every player's shelters, because that is going to be a fair amount of data that it's tracking, especially if it's tracking every individual plant. And if a player is like me or beyond me and has a ridiculous amount of shelters, and maybe they just dedicate several shelters to different things, max out a budget with nothing but Tato plants in a big old place, that could get rather taxing. So that I could see as a legitimate reason for them to try to avoid resources, as much as that may suck. Now, I do think there is a common middle ground that could have been met. So assuming the issue is they didn't want to have, the resources bogged down tracking all of these things, why couldn't they met us in the middle and, still allowed you to build these things, but more as decorative type items? Maybe lowering their budget within shelters to the minimum, and then, you can throw it down. It's just not going to grow anything. But hey, it's still there for looks. I mean, some of these items that you're not allowed to build, people paid money for in the atomic shop. I feel like that's the least they could do. Now I'm going to go off on a little side tangent real quick about the high-stakes shelter. 2,000 atoms. Currently, right now, at the time of making this video, it is the newest shelter out there. Now, the shelter itself is themed after, a whole casino, which I'm going to try to overlook the fact that, for the most part, they just stole a location they had already built, patched in a few spots, and, oh, that's a shelter now. Now, this place is freaking massive, themed, themed after a casino, but, fun fact, you can only build 5 slot machines in it. 5 slot machines, 3 horse games, 15 assorted tables. But with all that, you will never fill this thing out to make it actually look like a full-fledged casino, because you can only have 5 friggin' slot machines. For those of you who haven't been to a casino, in the real world, there's a crap ton of slot machines in casinos. That's kind of one of their main things. There's more slot machines than anything else. So it really leaves you wondering, why only 5 slot machines? That seems really stupid. Yeah, well, there's a lot of little weirdness like that when it comes to shelters, and I really feel like there shouldn't be. At least not nowhere near as restrained as it currently is. But alright, let's get back on the original topic of, the 2 main things that you're not allowed to build. The second one, of course, is allies. And for the life of me, I cannot figure out a single reasonable excuse as to why you can't have allies in a shelter. The very best I could come up with is, you switch from Camp 1 to Camp 2. You go to Camp 2, and now your ally's naked. So maybe there's a fear that you're just going to have some massive nudist colony shelter build going on where all your allies are running around naked because their clothes never want to load in properly. I don't know. Whatever the case may be, I think it's ridiculous. I see no reason why you can't build an ally in a shelter, and I'll take it one step further. I'm not sure why you can't build every ally in a shelter. Take this build, for instance. This is the very last shelter build I did, and it is the last one I will ever do. This place would benefit a lot by having allies walking around, making it feel lived in. As it sits right now, it almost feels hollow. Even though there's plenty of things built, it is so lifeless. My build, to me, is boring, because I don't even have the illusion of this being some sort of a settlement, and it sucks. A nice workaround on this one would be to allow players to build their ally, but disable the ability to go into their dialogue tree. I think that would likely solve any major issues there are to be had with them. The next major issue with shelters would be the build budget, especially when you get into larger shelters where you quickly realize that you don't have nearly enough budget to fully deck the place out the way you want. I will go so far as to say build budget across the board needs to be increased, and it needs to be increased substantially the larger the shelter is. Now, lastly, I just want you to know that if you buy a shelter, just know that you're buying it for yourself in the slight hope that someone stumbles in and sees whatever you've built. Except most players avoid shelters. They don't like going in them, and if they do go in, most of the time they're looking to see if there's a vending machine in there, and then they quickly dip back out. So honestly, you're buying a camp that doesn't have full camp functionality, and that sucks. But hop down in the comments, let me know your thoughts, and please remember to like, sub, and share. Later.